Everyone is vulnerable to being pinned when life plays hardball, whether it is a physical or mental health condition. No one can stand alone. For those who are not pinned, appreciate that it could be you or loved one someday. So when you see a chance to help someone, please do. They are not weak, they are pinned. Even a slight hand up and a listening ear can begin seriously lightening the load, change, or save a life. Help end stigma. Move from being pinned to purpose. Time for a hand up.
Hello, everyone. My name is Geoff Moore. I'm the founder of this Pinned2Purpose podcast. It's a great pleasure for me to have Laura Morton, who is the co-producer and director of Anxious Nation, as my guest today. The reason we're doing this podcast, for those of you who haven't seen it before, is to help to eliminate mental health stigma and give people a hand up on their healing journeys. So it's fantastic to have a chance to chat with Laura today, and had a chance to get to know her several months ago at a conference in New York called The Real, which is really all about mental health and, again, giving people a hand up on their journeys. And Laura, I there's so much to say in terms of you've done an incredible amount in your life, and your background is hugely impressive. You have so many angles to come from, but, you know, in terms of all of the books, I understand you've written 60 books, 22 New York Times bestsellers. You've had the chance to work with a lot of different celebrities, you know, the Jonas Brothers, Melissa Etheridge, Dana Patrick, many, many more. And then also the best-selling business books that you've written. And I've read some of these works, I mean, with John Maxwell and Bob Parsons, et cetera. And your work in the entertainment industry for over 30 years. So certainly a wealth of life, a wealth of living and experience to draw upon for this latest work, which is going to be the focus of our discussion. But why don't I pass it over to you, and maybe if you want to tell people a little bit more about your background, and then we'll lead up as to why you've done this fantastic and important film.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me, Geoff. I so enjoyed meeting you at The Real in New York, and that was such an important event that my daughter and I were a part of. And I appreciate the work that you are doing in the lane of mental health and your commitment to giving people a hand up. So I really do appreciate that. I think you sort of covered my background. I have been in production for many, many years, and I also have been writing books for many years, and I will continue to write more books than movies. But that's just, I'm a storyteller by trade. And so that whatever that path is that allows me to tell the best story to impact the greatest number of lives is the way that I choose to go. And, I base everything that I do today, especially on, having an impact, putting good into the world. And that's really important to me.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. And I think something that's very interesting here, for people watching this, because so many parents, are challenged by these issues, and every parent really loves their kids and wants to do the best for them. But anxiety on the parents themselves, it makes that a bit of a challenge sometimes. So I think wanted to know some of your thoughts on that, because I know this film is a great resource for parents, but if you want to comment a bit about that as well.
Sure. So the film is called Anxious Nation, and the idea to make this documentary came to me in 2018. I was sitting at my desk one day feeling really frustrated as a parent. I have a daughter who has been anxious her whole life, and it was behavior that I didn't recognize because I really didn't consider myself to be an anxious person or an anxious parent. But there were behaviors that I just didn't recognize for what they were. And I thought I was failing as a mom. I thought that I really was dropping the ball in 100 different ways. And so I was sitting at my desk one day, right here, and, my head down, and I just thought, man, if my family is struggling, how are other families getting through this? I couldn't fathom this. And this was in 2018. So, lots of stigma. People weren't talking about it. And I just put one line on Facebook. I was like, I got to see if other people are going through this. So I just, one sentence on Facebook, kids and anxiety, who's going through it? And it was a tsunami of responses, but I was stunned because nobody was talking about it. And I was getting, the responses on social media were all pretty like, I am, we are, my daughter is, my grandson is, whatever. It was all the private messages that started coming to me that was a real awakening, because it's like that one line gave parents, friends of mine, permission to talk about it without feeling any shame.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it was huge. And I was getting messages from people that I actually socialized with. On Facebook, we're friends with a lot of people that we never see, but like these were coming from people I had just had dinner with, and we just never talked about it. Mm-hmm. And so I pushed back and I thought about it, and I thought, gosh, I think this is bigger than a book. And, I wanted to tell the story. I wanted to explore. I wanted to understand why we are an anxious nation. And I know you're up there in Canada, but I think we're all an anxious nation right now, right? The nation of anxiety. And I really wanted to understand what was creating this. And in 2018, Geoff, the question that I was asking is, are we more anxious, or are we just more aware of it?
Interesting.
Which was a really, I think, fair question in 2018. And the answer, I think, is both, right? I think we are more anxious, and I think we are absolutely more aware of it. But in 2018, I thought it was a really fair question. And I also wanted to understand if anxiety showed up differently in different parts of the country, in metropolitan areas versus rural areas versus the South, the North, in different communities. How is it impacting the Black and Brown community versus the Asian community versus, any other community that we all live as one, right? And so those were the things that I set out to explore. And by the time we started filming, it was late 2019. And
closer to COVID, pre-COVID, but getting close.
And by the time we were really in the throes of filming, we shut down for COVID. So I think we shot our first frame of film in September of 2019, and by March, thankfully, I had sent out 14 cameras to our families and our kids, these little 4K cameras, because the one thing that I knew for sure is that, especially the kids in the film, they were so used to just filming themselves on their phone. So I didn't think they would have any issue filming themselves. And we sent them these really cool high-tech 4K cameras, and just kind of gave them a directive on what to do. And I think some of the best footage that we have in the film came directly from the kids, and especially from them during COVID, because they had nothing else to do, right?
Super powerful.
Yeah.
Because you want their voice, right? And I know you've emphasized that too. Ultimately, you want them they need to tell the world, or they need to also express their feelings and where they're coming from, because in this case, and that's the kid side, the family side, is to understand that and to be helpful.
But on the parent side, I think the key thing here was, because we have a lot of kids in the film that participated in this because they're over 18 without their parents. And we have quite a few kids in the film who are under 18, well, certainly at the time that we filmed. And so their parents were a part of the journey. And I thought it was really important to look at this crisis. And it is a crisis. And it was a crisis in 2018. I thought it was really important to look at it from a full 360. And so much of the film, especially the early part of the film, focuses on the parents. What is our contribution to this equation? Because I think that the narrative today has really become very one-sided. I think it's become very easy to point the finger at phones and social media and our devices as being the cause. And I think when you take a step back and if you looked at a pie, it certainly is a nice slice of the pie, but it is not the pie. And we wanted to look at the whole pie, because anxiety is not a one size fits all. It's not the same thing for everyone. And that's what makes it so challenging to be a one size fits all answer, right? People just want to know, just tell me what to do. As a parent, I want to know what to do. As somebody who struggles with anxiety, I want to know what to do. Just tell me what to do. And it's not that simple.
Mm.
And I think what is so interesting about the film is that it allows parents, families as a whole, to look at anxiety and the impact that it's not only having on the family as a whole, because you can very easily have one child that has anxiety and one child that does not, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you can have one parent that, nurtures the anxiety and another parent who's a tough love parent.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And, you can have parents that never dealt with their own anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
but they know they don't want their kids to feel the way they do. So they overcompensate by coddling and not giving their kids the tools or the resources. So I think there's a multitude of things to look at when we talk about anxiety and the root cause. And I think, you have to start with nature versus nurture.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. As you started getting into this, what types of realizations, the more you were filming and the more news stories you were hearing, and how did your thinking also evolve on this as you dove deeper into the film?
Yeah, great question, because I had a lot of ahas. I told you I didn't think I was an anxious parent. And truthfully, I don't think I was really anxious until I started making a film about anxiety in the middle of a pandemic, right? That's enough to make anybody anxious. What I didn't realize was my contribution. Even if I wasn't an anxious parent, there were things that I was doing out of a pure place of love, out of a pure place of wanting to, help my child, that was actually making things harder and worse.
Mm.
And we have an expert in the film that talks about anxiety as a cult leader in the home. And it's a great description, because anxiety does tend to control everything that's happening in the household when you're dealing with a super anxious child or parent, or, you name it, right? What I didn't realize was that the things that I was doing that I thought were making things easier for my daughter were actually adding to her anxiety. And that was me servicing the cult leader. And so that was a huge aha for me. And learning that term, learning that and learning the term doing the disorder was really helpful to me, which was something that I was doing because, look, I'm a single mom.
Mm-hmm.
So there were plenty of times that I would be really tired at the end of the day, and I just didn't want the struggle. I didn't want the confrontation between the anxiety and me. And, my child was so young at the time that, there was a lot of thought. And I think this happens to a lot of parents. You think the child is being manipulative or it's a behavioral issue, but certainly so many families, and especially back when my daughter was growing up, we didn't look at it as mental health or mental, any kind of mental health struggle. We, I would take her to the pediatrician and they would be like, oh, it's age appropriate. She'll outgrow it. And there was never a thought. It took 7 years. The two interesting things I want to tell you. It took 7 years for a professional to tell me my daughter struggled with anxiety. And on average, it takes families 2 to 8 years once they have that diagnosis to do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that staggering because we treat everything else with more importance.
Right. That's an incredibly important point, because with all of this, and you're talking about, the greater, is it a greater problem, or is it just that we're more aware? And it's both. The greater awareness obviously will hopefully shorten those times, the 2 to 8 years, the 7 years, because people will be trying to zero in more quickly, and maybe the medical profession will be even more informed to help people. But those times obviously have real world implications for the child, for the parent, for the community. And so critical to how do you shorten those times?
Sure. Well, what happens is if it's taking you 8 years, you're sending your kid off into the world completely ill-equipped and they fall apart, right? So it's, for me, that just, I didn't want that to be the option. But what happens, is families, of course, today, families are struggling financially. Insurance is not paying for these kinds of treatments. You're limited to 5, maybe if you're lucky, 10 sessions. If your child had a blood disease or cancer and your insurance company told you they could only have 5 chemo treatments, we'd be all up in arms, and so this is something that has to change. And I know it's different in Canada, but I don't think that the resources are available to families that need them. And I think that they've become very hard to navigate, because even if you can, meaning you have insurance and getting an appointment can take 6 months.
Right. Absolutely.
And so what do you do in the interim? And, where our kids are getting the bulk of their mental health care, 1/3 of kids in the United States get their mental health care in schools. And the schools are ill-equipped. The teachers aren't really trained to do this. They're underfunded. They're undereducated. They don't know what to do. They're afraid of triggering. And so, and you've got a group of educators who are equally anxious. In the United States, 80% of educators in our system identify as being highly anxious.
Wow. That's a huge number. It touches on so many areas, and I don't want to go too far off track, but because it's,
Sure.
But it's part of what you've done here with Anxious Nation to bring all of these topics, to people's awareness, and then focus back on the areas where we can really make a difference. But, going back to the real event that we went to in New York, for example, what I'm happy with and respect there is an attempt to get a lot more investment into mental health, right? Which will hopefully have more solutions and alleviate the lead times and find more public-private partnerships and have the types of discussions we're having now and that you had in the film, and just be honest and real about it, so that, those wait times, people don't have to wait so much. But there's a real also business opportunity, that it's not just reliant on government funding, which may not be there.
It's definitely not there anymore here. But what was interesting was my daughter, who will be 17 in July. She was 11 when we started filming. And she did a panel. I can't remember if you were at that panel.
I heard her speak, which I was very impressed with, because it takes courage, especially for a young person, to speak in front of a room full of adults. But she did a great job. She did an amazing job.
What I thought was so interesting, it was the panel that had the Gen Z kids on it, and Sevi was the youngest of the kids on that panel. And there was a very impressive young man. Gosh, I wish I could remember his name. He was terrific. But the conversation turned to apps. And what was really interesting, Christian, he was fantastic, out of San Francisco, 22 years old, and he's had 3 unicorns. Like, he's had 3 tech companies that he sold. Yeah. And he was talking about that when he was 16, the last thing that he wanted was to go on his phone and use an app when he was feeling so dark. And, it was such an interesting conversation, because I didn't expect to hear that from, that generation, what they want and what they need. And you and I were actually talking about this before we came on air, is these kids need real connection, right? And they need to know that they're not alone. They need to feel seen and heard, and they need real connection. They need to know that there's a community that comes together, even on the hard stuff, especially on the hard stuff. And I thought it was really interesting listening to Christian talk. I mean, here's a guy who, at a very young age, made a lot of money in the tech realm. And he was just saying, like, I just don't know if these apps are the answer. But I think that there are other things that are. And so I love that you're bringing that up. There are so many business opportunities. And I think that we have to rely on private sector. And I think we have to rely, quite frankly, on that generation, because they're the first generation, I think, coming into this conversation willing openly to talk about it in real time. Not a generation that's, seeing like an opportunity, or like, this is a gaping hole in need, right? But they're willing to talk about it in real time. I think that is the first chance we have of bringing in the next generation as being less anxious than their predecessor. And I think that's everything.
Right. No, fascinating. I mean, one of my upcoming podcasts will be with a very impressive young Canadian woman in her 20s who has an app and who has gone through her mental health challenges. And so I think of all of these things as being a piece of the puzzle. And then depending on where they're applied and what groups that can affect, some things are, like you said before, everybody's journey is different. So there's no one size fits all. But if you have a lot of puzzle pieces out there and people are aware of them, then hopefully they can gravitate towards the ones that'll be helpful and,
Totally.
It will be motivating. I wanted to ask you too, because for me, the purpose part of Pinned2Purpose is about, individuals, and it applies to people at all ages, just, focusing on something that means something to them and very uplifting to them. And I think of team sports for, boys and girls, men and women, any collective activities as being one. There's tons of things, right? Or any volunteering. I mean, I've got 4 kids, we encourage them to do different things. They did some things, that's a personal decision too. But, when you go out and there's endless causes in every community that need some help and need a hand up, not just financial, but literally being out there. And so what do you think in terms of, like we said, it's not all about being on your phone, and then that is a stressor, but it's also the community and finding purpose, so that you're always kind of focusing on a North Star, hopefully that lets you deal with what you're dealing with, but then, aspire towards a better day.
Yeah, it's such a good point. We spend the last 30 minutes of the film talking about this. Yeah. And we talk about the fact that we were never meant to be singular. Mm-hmm. We were always meant to be plural. And, in 1981, Faith Popcorn coined this phrase called cocooning. Mm-hmm. In 1981, think about that. That predates social media, phones, you name it, right? And she coined the term because she predicted that was where society was heading. Hiding out in our rooms, not being social, being connected without being connected. And I think it's just fascinating when you really think about how we've developed into that as a, culturally. But I think that there is something for everyone. We talk so much about it. One of the elements that we use in Anxious Nation is artwork. And yeah, the artwork was so great in the film, and it was curated from kids all over the world. What's fascinating about it, Geoff, is that it was curated from kids all over the world based on how they're feeling emotionally. And we did not have a single piece created for the film. So what we used was as is, and it fit the storytelling as if we asked them to create it, right? What was really amazing is what we know is art therapy is also such a wonderful tool. Dance, taking a walk in nature, connecting with nature, grounding, just having your feet touch the grass, with which so many people no longer do. Team sports, wonderful. As long as you don't have an anxious parent on the sideline, ratcheting it up, right? And or if you're like Andre Agassi, who never wanted to play tennis,
That's
right?
True.
And so this kind of circles back to the beginning of the conversation. As parents, what role do we play, right? We put our kids into something because we know it's good for them, but is it really what they want?
Absolutely.
And what I can tell you is, I think my biggest takeaway in making Anxious Nation as a parent was recognizing that I had to allow my daughter to be who she is and not who I want her to be. And when we're raising children, especially young children, we have a tendency to want to guide them, say, this is the path I want you to walk. And it may not be their path. My daughter will take a gap year when she graduates high school next year. She's not a student. My path for her would be, you're going to go to college. But she's taking a gap year. And I think it's the best thing that we could do. And I think coming together on that and really recognizing who your child is, really seeing who your child is and allowing them that space, right? So there are so many things that they can develop. Music is another really great outlet. We use music a lot in the film as well. Kids are creative. They like to do creative things. Whether they're scientific or artsy or whatever it is, there's something creative in all of our kids. And it's finding that and nurturing that, right? That's the nature versus nurture. And allowing them to grow into those interests and grow into the person they were meant to be. That's amazing. Everything.
And tell me a bit more, maybe, I don't know if you want to take an example or just a story, but, the type of feedback you've gotten about the film from viewers all over the place, all over the world, and things that have stood out to you, or I'm sure some things were very uplifting and other things were maybe sad in some ways because of the situations that some people have dealt with through their children. But I don't know if there's a story or two that you'd like to share based on unsolicited feedback.
Thank you. I don't think anybody's ever asked me that question before. I will tell you, it's amazing because, you don't make a documentary to make money. It'd be nice if we made money, but we didn't make it to make money, right? We made the documentary to have an impact. And that is what our film does every day. And, there are screenings all over, certainly weekly, maybe not daily anymore, but weekly, schools, organizations. We were just in Chicago last week for a screening. And we're not invited to go to all the screenings because the schools can't afford it. But when we are, it's such a pleasure. Couple of things that I've heard. The film, this is from families. The film gave us a common language to be able to talk about this in our home. And that just touches me because I think that's so important. Where was this film when I was raising my son or my daughter?
Right.
This is the film I needed. And in fact, I made the film I needed. So I knew if it was a film I needed, I knew it would resonate, right? And certainly I had a fantastic team of creatives. I have an Academy Award-winning director, Vanessa Roth, who really shared my vision with this film. I think that families, there are lots of things that are very difficult. One of the things that I hear very often is that I don't want to watch the movie. I'm scared to watch the movie. And I find that really interesting because that tells me a lot, right? About their own anxiety. And
what do you say to people like that who might say that, or you may not be directly in contact with them, but I mean, that's understandable, but that's a big deal.
It is. 50% of the people that are struggling with anxiety will watch the film and 50% won't.
Right.
And that was a big awakening for me because here we are. I think we're more anxious today than we were yesterday. And I think when the film came out, a year and a half ago, we were already pretty anxious, right?
Yeah.
And that was one of the biggest surprise factors for me was that people fear watching this film. And what I tell people is, as parents, we have to do the hard stuff and we have to lead by example, which means we also have to have hard conversations.
Yeah.
And we have to start by looking in the mirror. And we might not like the reflection, but don't break the mirror, change the reflection.
Very good.
Right. And so just at this screening in Chicago, there was a woman who was very chatty with me before the film and was telling me, I work at summer camps. I'd love to bring this to summer camp. And I said, have you watched the film? She said, no, I'm afraid to. And I said, that's so interesting. I said, here you are, this advocate, but you won't watch the film for yourself. She said, no, I'm afraid that it's going to really poke at me. I said,
wow.
Okay. I said, well, you're here, so I hope you'll stay. And she did. And she came up to me afterwards and she said, I have to tell you that I actually found the film uplifting.
Fantastic. Wow.
Yeah. She said, I don't know why I feared it. And I said, you do know why you feared it. I said, and that's what you have to address. I said, but the fact that you found it uplifting is a beautiful thing for me because it's not meant to make anybody feel bad. It's not meant to make you feel like you're failing. It's meant to help you navigate territory none of us have ever been through before. Right? And when you're dealing with multi-generational issues, where does that stop? Where do you want to break that chain? Because if it was alcoholism or drug abuse, you would look at it through a very specific lens. But because it's a mental health issue, anxiety, depression, it runs in our family, right? We look at it through a totally different lens. And I think when we start treating physical health the same as we treat emotional health,
absolutely,
because it's all health, I think we'll see great strides.
Absolutely. And what about stigma? And what are your views, given all of your work on the film, what you've heard, et cetera? Are you optimistic that again we are breaking away and breaking down and getting closer to what you just said, which is physical and mental health are, they're intrinsic to being human. They're all part of us. It's so do you have any observations or comments on stigma? It does hold so many people back, and it is, anyway, it's that 2 to 7 years delay you're talking about in a different way. Some people are delaying, and their journeys are tough because they're concerned about being stigmatized. And
well, we live in a world where our entire lives are on social media, right? But we only post the very happy stuff on social media.
Right.
And so I think we're so afraid. I think we have made some strides. And I think that, as I was saying, my daughter's generation, those Gen Xers, really the Gen Xers, I think that they are the first generation that just talks so openly about it, right? In school, socially, they take mental health days. They do all the things that you should be allowed to do, right? With absenteeism at an all-time high in both schools and the workplace. We have to look at that. We need to honor it. And what are we doing to support our employees through it, our kids through it, our staff through it, right? I mean, our students, our teachers, what are we doing to offer support? Because I think the more they feel seen, heard, and supported, the less stigma they'll feel, right? But as a parent in 2018, I genuinely thought I was failing. And what parent wants to think they've failed their child? What parent wants to think, oh my God, everybody's going to think I'm the worst parent because now I'm going to put it out into the world. At the end of the day, I don't know anyone not struggling with anxiety on some level right now. And I think people are turning to various places. Interestingly, I think so many people are reconnecting with their faith, which is something that I think is the fastest growing religion in the United States is no religion at all. There's been a falling away of that faith. And it isn't about faith, it's about connection, right? It's about being in a place where you can connect with people, like-minded, same vibe, all come together. And I think you find more often than not, we have a wonderful pastor in our film named Tim Story. And he talks a lot about community and connection and loneliness and isolation. And what better way to come together than finding a place to connect with people who all are going through the same thing.
Yeah, beautiful. Absolutely.
Right. So I think it's really important. I think stigma is maybe a little better because we're talking about it. If there was a silver lining to COVID at all, Geoff, I think this is it. I think that we need to do more than just talk about it, though. I think we need to see some action. And I think it isn't going to happen on the federal level, the state level. It starts at home, right? It starts in your home. And then you take that into your community.
It's fascinating because you were saying in 2018, you felt like you were, a terrible parent or you're one of the worst parents because your own self-talk was weighing on you, right? And the self-talk for everyone is such a key thing. I mean, when my business didn't succeed and I was hospitalized, I thought I was one of the biggest losers in the world. I don't know. That's a terrible term, and I don't mean it like that. But I just saying, and our self-talk gets there, right? So it has to be that before people do get pinned or stuck, that they are able to talk about it. And when we realize our common humanity like that, then we can easily breathe a sigh of relief. Not that everything is over and we've figured it all out, but that we're just the same. And we need that hand up sometimes, and we can give others a hand up. And so, it's a very powerful what you said, that you felt that way at that time, because I think that's at the root of problems for a lot of people when their challenges are really starting to get them and the self-talk gets worse and worse. They're being much harder on themselves than somebody else would be. And that's,
I think we are all our own worst critics, right? But what was worse was that I felt very alone in that, and it turned out I was not. And I then spent the next 5 years making a movie about it. And it's I think just the fact that we can have this conversation is progress. And if, your listener is able to discern anything that helps them in their journey, just even a new term like doing the disorder or, serving the cult leader, or you pick it, right? Or, gosh, I never really thought about painting. Maybe I'll start painting. Anything that helps on that journey is a win. And I think that we have to put more checks in the win column.
Yeah, excellent. Now, would you consider, or are you considering, an anxious nation too?
Not today.
Okay.
Not today. I was recently asked to do another documentary in the same lane. I don't think I'm really interested in that right now. Documentaries are hard. I'm going to tell you that. They are grueling. They're hard. They are, the industry itself is a little bit upside down. When we went to go sell our film, true story, our agent called one of the streamers, and I won't tell you which one, but called one of the streamers. And they said, oh, such an important movie. What a message. Absolutely incredible. If only there were dead bodies.
Hard to believe,
right?
Yeah.
And so my agent was like, come again? Like, what does that mean? And they said, yeah, mandate is dead bodies. We're only really focused on true crime and celebrity driven content. That's it. And, if there were if just one of those kids had actually killed themselves, we'd be all over this. And my agent said, you're kidding, right? And he said, I wish I was. Yeah. Wait, let me finish the story on this one. An hour later, an executive from that streamer called and said, hey, is there any way I can get a link to that film? Because my family really needs to watch this. And I said, no.
Yeah, no. Absolutely.
I said, no. Yeah. I said, my agent called me. What do you want to do? I said, no. I said, it's not good enough. I mean, it's like, really? I said, no. I said, in hindsight, maybe I should have said yes out of the humanity, but I said no, because I was so appalled that is where the industry is right now. Right. That they would have been happier if any one of our kids in that film who talked about suicide actually went through with it.
Horrendous. It touches on another point, though, beside this, which I think is maybe critical. I think a lot of people in their careers, or you're getting to the entertainment side only, right? And that's what they think sells and that's what they want. But our real lives are so much more complex, and they are filled with very real issues. And so we have to stop playing games to think that that's all people are interested in, because underneath it all, like you said, you asked that one line question on Facebook and you found interest from everywhere. I mean, I won't say the companies and stuff too, but I've been traveling and I met a person that I knew from in a business, and when I went into, we were talking seriously about business, but when I went into what I was trying to do in the podcast, he asked me to close the door, and he was talking about his life challenges and stuff, which he never talks about with anybody. And look, that's human. It's understandable, right? It's human, but it's really sad. Hopefully, that type of situation doesn't happen again. I mean, it's really horrendous, but that's
the good news is you can stream the film on Amazon and on Apple and on Google Play, but most people really watch on Amazon or Apple. And so the film is available to stream. It's out there in the world. We love doing events and coming to your community. And the reason why we like doing those community events is exactly what we were talking about. It's to bring a group of people together who are going through something similar at the same time, and opening up a conversation and a dialogue so that people can actually feel like, oh my gosh, it's not just me.
Right. Wonderful. Absolutely. No, it's huge. And I was going to ask you, and you've given some examples right now, and I'm going to provide a link so all of our viewers can know where to access your film. And you're talking about the different resources. But Laura, I think this has been a wonderful, just open, honest dialogue about these issues, and fantastic, the film that you have brought to the world. But are there any other, remaining points that you'd like to share today, just for the viewers about Anxious Nation and anything else?
I just thank you so much for having me and for having this conversation. I just want people to know it's okay not to be okay. Mm-hmm. Right. And it is not anything to be ashamed of. And we do the best we can. And we're all living through really kind of weird, uncharted time, times, waters, whatever the metaphor is. I think it's really important to know that there is something you can do. I think that this is not insurmountable. I think it's really important to know that anxiety is something that doesn't get cured. It can be managed, but you have to do the work, and you have to provide the tools as a parent and as a family. You need to work on it systemically. And when you do, you'll see great strides. We've seen it in our home, and my daughter still struggles. There has not been a bow tied on her story. Still has hard days, still takes mental health days, and that's okay.
Yeah, amazing. Well, thank you so much, Laura. It's great to see you. I'm going to watch the film again. I've watched it before, but after talking to you, I think I want to watch it again. So thanks so much, and all the best to you. Thanks.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Take care.